Hey, welcome to Behind the Couch. I feel like because we only do it once a month, I'm like, how do I set this up again? And that was quite clear tonight. But
and you
hey,
did
Emily.
Great.
Hi, Emily. Hi, Ashley. Laura. Hello from the mountains. Dr. Scott, we have some new Patreon members.
Yes, as I finally find us on YouTube. I'm like, sorry for me being so rude.
No, so rude. Give us eye contact.
More Patreon members, new Patreon members. We're so excited. Elizabeth L, Suzanne C, Shannon L, Carrie C, Holly, Esther H, Rachel, Briley H, and Eugenie, who joined early today. And I just want to give a special shout out to Esther. I don't know how you're seeing us from the women's prison in the UK, but I know you are a brilliant and resourceful young woman, and I admire you for sneaking whatever electronic devices you need to.
You're hilarious. Is this where I tell you it's not the same Esther?
Oh, damn. I thought it was the other Esther. We've got two Esther H's.
I know. I checked the address to make sure.
I don't know if the world can handle two Esther H's. So there you go.
I mean, maybe she's in prison here in the States, because it definitely was not a UK address.
Even better. Well,
we'll come visit. Write us, Esther.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we'll come visit. If you're in prison in the States, we'll come see you, Esther. I promise you that.
That's another great segue that we haven't officially announced it, but we are definitely going to be attending CrimeCon UK in June next year. So
exciting.
We're not
going to be more. It's going to be more than attending, actually.
It is. They haven't formally announced. Let's just say we're going to have more than a booth. We'll put it there for this time.
That's good.
We are going to be traveling abroad in 2023. We also picked a date for our Patreon holiday party, which is Saturday, December 17th. So if you're a Patreon member, you should have gotten that update today. And to be determined as far as times and platforms, it will probably be Zoom. We'll get all that to you. We'll just keep it on the one original post, and I'll just keep updating that for you guys. But it's always a blast to hang out with you. So look forward to it. If you're not a Patreon member, you can, up until the night of, you can join us for our virtual holiday party. They're going to have a kissing booth too. At our holiday party, Shannon, or where? CrimeCon? Not sure.
Only if everybody's can verify they've gotten the monkeypox vaccine, we might consider it.
Okay. I'm sure by June 2023, there'll be a whole new vaccine and virus.
Yeah, it'll
be worried about.
It'll be gecko pox or something. Who knows?
Gecko pox. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, good thing we're not going to Hawaii. Also, for Patreon, starting 2023, we are revamping. There's going to be multiple tiers. There's going to be all new perks. We have some brand new special things in the works, including being a part of a special secret group chat with us through a particular platform. So you guys can just we can check in with each other whenever we feel like it, just feel a little bit more intimate. As well as some really cool stuff. So if you want to join now at whatever level you're at, you can, go up or stay where you're at, depending on how things shake out after the first of the year, once you kind of see how we revamp all that. So that is coming up, and we will announce that in 2023 as well. So anything else that you have, Scott, before we bring our guests on?
I think that's it. Thank you for those announcements. That's great.
Yes. So we're going to bring our guests on. Scott, do you want to introduce who we are talking to today?
Yes.
John.
We're so excited to have on a wonderful podcast that we were able to hang out with earlier this year. It was fantastic. Wicked Deeds is an indie true crime podcast, and it focuses mainly on mostly unsolved, murdered, and missing persons investigations about New England and the surrounding areas. And they seek to bring awareness to lesser known, very, very important, because some cases grab all of the publicity, and even sometimes forgotten cases, which is also incredibly important. Even though this true crime genre is so huge, people still fall through the cracks. So you guys are really doing something incredibly valuable. And their main focus, which is very clear in the work they do, is to be advocates for victims and their families. So kudos to both of you for really raising the vibration of true crime podcasts in general. We really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
It's so good to see you guys. Last time I saw you guys, we were sitting in an airport, like munching on a bagel.
It was warm and now it's cold here.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. We have nothing to complain about where we're at compared to you guys.
Yeah.
Right.
East Coast, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
East Coast, so it's about 40 degrees outside right now. So,
Oh man.
and that's warm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was
For
going to
this time.
say that's not too bad for you guys. Well, so we did meet in Dallas. If my memory serves me correctly, it's when we rudely stepped in front of you guys at the bar. And
I think
I know, yeah.
at the mixer. And I just remember turning around and
That tracks.
apologizing.
That tracks for us. So.
And John was just so nice. He was like, no, we don't know what we want either. So go ahead.
Yeah,
I think we sat there staring at the bar for like a hot second, trying to figure out what we were going to get.
Well, that was a funny experience in and of itself, because I was like, oh, it's a mixer. And I don't know, like the LA person in me came out and I decided to dress up. And then we walk into this total sports bar.
Yep.
Dive.
Everybody wearing t-shirts and
I'm pretty sure
shorts.
everyone was like, what the fuck is she wearing?
And for those of you at home that didn't get to see her amazing outfit, she looked like a really classy dominatrix is what you looked like. You had the Dom ponytail, you had like
the harness,
the super cool harness on top of a classy outfit.
You were rocking it.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm lucky they did not throw me out of that place. So yeah, that was our first meeting. And then we stood outside talking for a bit and just really got to know you guys. What did you think of your first podcast festival?
Oh yeah.
It was so fun, so different. I was like so anxious beforehand, and then just everybody was so nice, and it was so wonderful to meet everyone and chat and meet new listeners and current listeners of ours. So that was really awesome. We loved it.
Yeah, I think it was great to meet a lot of other podcasters too, because we learned a lot from talking to you guys and Women in Crime and a couple other podcasts as well. And yeah, I think that was what we took out of it the most. It was great to see, listeners and to meet other people that are interested in true crime, but to also be able to kick around ideas between other podcasters that have been in the space longer that, can give you some insight into where to go, things to avoid.
Yeah.
Like that. So
I
think it was a great learning experience.
Being newbies, it was like, okay, what are we doing?
Totally.
Here?
Because that was our first podcast festival in 2019. And I feel like we're looking like at ourselves in the past because we felt the same way. We were like, oh my God, everyone is so nice.
Isn't that weird too? Because we all had that same impression of like, I don't know when we started exactly what we were expecting, but I wasn't expecting the camaraderie and the support.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. That was huge. So
it was your first podcast festival. Tell us about the show and how you even got this idea to step into this world of true crime podcasting or podcasting in general, maybe. But I would just love to hear your story of why you decided to do Wicked Deeds.
Yeah. So, before John and I met, I was always into true crime. It started like when I was a little kid, I loved Scooby-Doo, and, it kind of morphed into like once Criminal Minds.
Gateway drug.
Like, yes, exactly. Yeah. And I've been obsessed with Criminal Minds like my whole life. So
I shit you not, Brittany. In my notes right now, I have a question about how much of a true crime fan were you on a scale from Scooby-Doo to like Forensic Files? So you kind of covered that already.
I guess it's Forensic Files.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, I was just always really into it. Once, we got together, obviously you get to know the other person. We would always talk about those things. And then it kind of like morphed from there. And we had talked about it. We had kicked the idea around for a couple years. And I don't know if you guys have seen the show Only Murders in the Building.
Sure.
Yeah. So we were watching that randomly just one weekend. And then we were like, if they can do a podcast,
let's just do it.
Let's just do this.
Let's just do it.
Yeah. So like Brittney had said, we were kicking around the idea but it was kind of like a fever dream type thing. Oh, we should start a podcast. We should do this. Not really thinking, how much work would take to get into it. But then, yeah, we watched the show. We were on like the second episode and we're like, all right, I'm just going to research some stuff, get some electronics.
Yeah,
and
all of a sudden
we're going to go into it
from Amazon, and I'm like, what's happening? Doing this, and
Yes.
we were really doing this. So
yeah. So how did you decide kind of how and what to focus on in your show?
yeah, so I would say it definitely took some growing pains for us from when we first started, and how we've kind of gotten to where we are now. But I would say for me, being that like Criminal Minds fan, I know there's so much focus on serial killers, and, all of that is like glorified in some sick way sometimes. And we really wanted to focus on the victims and making sure that the focus is on their story, and that, they can continue to shine even though this tragedy has happened. So, just working it out between us, it's like, how do we tell this story in a way that focuses on them, but also is an engaging story? And obviously, when you're covering unsolved cases, like I feel, for me anyway, like I want to have some sort of, like, I want to try and help. What can I do to help? And with us and our format now, where John doesn't really know this story when I'm telling it to him, that helps, like, come up with maybe new leads or things that investigators might not have thought of to work. And hopefully, like, if a police department was listening to an episode, they'd be like, wow, okay, hold on, that's something we didn't think of. And so I think like that kind of goes into it too.
I love that as your hook.
Me
I think
too.
that's it's such an original hook. The only time I've ever seen something like that is in a non-true crime, in Smartless, Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and who's then I'm blanking on his name. Now he'll hate me. But they do that where one of them, arranges for a guest to be on, and the other two are completely surprised by it. But I think exactly what you're talking about is like not having, just sort of being bombarded with information sometimes opens up a third perspective, like it's a fresh ear, it's a fresh eye. So I love that whole concept. Did you intend to do that when you were coming up with this, or did that kind of emerge out of talks together?
I think John just wanted to do the least amount of work as possible, right? He's like, you do all the research and I'll listen.
Yes.
I'm the researcher with stuff like this, like electronics, all him, but
okay.
True crime, that was definitely me.
Yeah, it's my thing where like sometimes I'll get too fixated on one particular thing. So then like if I was researching a case, I would just get stuck on something and I would try to find all the information about this one thing, which may not work very well for, trying to write a narrative to tell a story. So yeah, it's great that I have to do less work now, but it kind of morphed into this because we started where, Brittney was writing a relatively scripted narrative. Then it was like, okay, she wrote a narrative. I kind of proofread it and made some changes. But then I felt like I was not a good actor. So like, I would know everything that was going on, and I would kind of script in my responses based on how I thought when I was reading through it, but it just didn't feel genuine. So then that was kind of taking a lot of time too. So then kicked it back to Brittney, and over like 60 episodes now, she's become a much better narrative writer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
As far as like telling story.
In the beginning, it was like, you need to look at this because I need help. I cannot write well.
Well, and that's something that just, I think you guys pick out because you're for a newer podcast, it's so consistent really from episode 1 to episode 60. So that's what I have found. I'm like, these guys really like mapped this out how they wanted to do it from the beginning. Or at least it seems that way, but it does feel like a really good mix of genuine storytelling, really good storytelling, but also these authentic responses and inquiries from you, John. And, so many other shows, one host can tell a story and the other person's just kind of giving these like silly commentary or, we
call it the color commentary.
Yeah, sort of like this over the top, like input that isn't really useful. But I find myself when, John, she's kind of going along with her story, even if she's like, hang on, I haven't got there yet.
Right.
But you're asking the questions that we're sort of asking, and you really represent the audience in that way. And it does feel like, you guys are taking us along sort of on this investigation. And it just works really nicely. I mean, it's a really great addition to the community for sure.
Cool.
So how do you?
Because sometimes we question ourselves too. We're like, especially when editing,
it's
like you hate everything that you do, but then when you put it out to other people, it's like, oh, there's a positive response with
sure.
that. So
Yeah,
it wasn't
sure.
bad.
Yeah. How do you go about choosing your cases now?
That's a tough one. I struggle sometimes. So I like to use mainly like, I don't know. I have different sites that I like to use. Specifically, I definitely use Uncovered. I don't know if you guys have heard of them before. They were at the True Crime Podcast Festival. They have a whole database of cases. So I like to go through there. And obviously, we're more focused on the northern or the northeast part of the United States. I'm still kind of on like the eastern side, like still covering like maybe South Carolina, other cases in those regions. But generally speaking, I'll just try and like find a case that is one that I don't see a ton of other podcasters or other YouTubers covering, because like our whole thing is to cover those cases that are lesser known. Don't get me wrong. We do cover cases that people have talked about before because others have asked us to, or, you know, it's something that intrigues me, or I think it's something that we could have a really good conversation about. But then there are cases where, for example, we just did one on Elva Poor a couple weeks ago, and her case was one that I had never heard of before, randomly stumbled upon it. I could only find a handful of sources, but I was so intrigued by it. And it was a case that I was so frustrated had never been talked about. I said, I don't care. I'm covering it. And like these people deserve to be talked about. And that usually when it's a case that I don't see covered very much, I'm instantly gravitating towards it.
Got it. I bet that's such great motivation, but it's probably frustrating research wise too.
Yes, it definitely is. So sometimes, you know, I can get through a case relatively quickly because unfortunately there just isn't a lot of source material. Whereas there are other ones like the one we're going to talk about today, whereas there were so many sources and so much to dig through. And you have, you know, differing reporting where it says one thing and then another report says something completely different 10 years later. So those things can kind of get a little annoying too. So I think it's a double-edged sword where you have like either a lack of reporting or so much that you don't know the true facts.
Yeah, definitely. And I think your audience appreciates, you know, you even saying like, these are conflicting, or here's what I found here, but there wasn't a lot more on that, just so they can sort of realize like what information you're giving them and do what they want with it.
Definitely.
Also,
yeah.
I noticed in this case particularly that it was jarring to do not a Wikipedia search, but do a Google search and look at all the news articles that came up. And you could tell from just the headlines how much they were like, if you go in chronological order, it's like they had all these assumptions and then they're like, oh, whoops, that was wrong. Then it just goes on and on and on, you know, over decades, which is so sad because you think about that all has an effect on the victim's family.
Absolutely.
You know, it keeps emerging, but it doesn't take any steps forward, or it goes in the wrong direction. But I love that this particular case too, for 3 decades. Is it 3 decades? Longer. 1990.
A little longer. Like 33 years roughly.
Wow. Yeah. I'm so glad you picked this one to share with us.
Well, and so you guys really suggested this one when I asked, okay, where do I start? What's a good one to start with? And I listened.
Not episode 1.
No, right. I know. Every podcaster should have tattooed on them, like, just don't listen to episode.
Don't listen to number 1.
But I listened to it on the way back from Dallas, and I can still remember flying into my home airport and, you know, kind of the latest information from earlier this year. You guys are going through it, and I'm like, ooh. But let's back up. And why don't you run through the case of Tracey Kroh for us from 1989, and Scott and I will be your audience and ask some questions as you go along.
Alrighty, sounds good.
You have a very abbreviated
I hear you. Oh, I know.
Narrative, but we cut out a lot of the fluff.
Because you guys have like episodes the same length as ours. So we understand this is a challenge here.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So around 6 o'clock on Saturday, August 5th, 1989, 17-year-old Tracey Kroh headed out of her parents' house in Enterline, Pennsylvania to drop off a barbecue grill and some coupons to her sister, Tammy, who lived roughly 10 to 15 minutes away. Later on that night, around 2 a.m., Ellen Kroh, Tracey's mother, awoke to find that her daughter wasn't home, but she wasn't overly concerned at that point because Tracey actually often spent the night at her sister's place, and her not being home just wasn't out of the ordinary. Ellen figured she probably dropped off the grill and the coupons and then just stayed over at her sister's. But then the following day, her parents discovered that she hadn't actually spent the night at her sister's. So instant panic set in for them. And they also discovered that the items that Tracey had planned to drop off at her sister's were there. So at this point, they know Tracey was there at one point, but she's nowhere to be found now. So with this new info at their disposal, they obviously knew something had to be up. So Tracey's father, Ivan, drove north into Dauphin County, Pennsylvania to see if he'd be able to find his daughter. And as Ivan was driving around this area, that's when he found his daughter's car sitting in a parking space in a place called Millersburg Square. And apparently Tracey had planned to visit this location sometime that night after stopping by her sister's. Her 1971 Mercury Comet that was white with one blue stripe on the side was sitting in the lot, untouched, locked, and did not have anything of hers inside. And it seems as though wherever she went, she took her purse and that's it. That was not in the car. So her parents were distressed and they called police to report their daughter missing. And obviously in a situation where somebody is just missing, you can kind of, think of one of two things happening. Either they've run off or maybe they were abducted. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background on Tracey so you can see why her family was like, absolutely not. There is no way she would have run off. So Tracey had a very happy home life. She was a normal teenager. Not only that, she was insanely smart, so smart that she was third in her class at Halifax area high school. And she was not messing around when it came to her studies. She participated in multiple extracurricular activities. She was the editor of the high school yearbook, an artist for the school newspaper, and she was a part of the Future Business Leaders of America. And after
not
school,
a girl that's running away.
Exactly. She's like, I've got a future to plan here. And she wanted to go to business school after she graduated or get a job. And she was considered, I guess you would say, or described as shy and studious, but she was still super friendly. She had a great sense of humor. She had plans for her life. Just did not make sense that she would just run off. Her parents knew something had to have happened. So after she was reported missing, the Millersburg police, as well as the Pennsylvania State Police, would take over the investigation, and they took it seriously from the start. This isn't like one of those investigations that we seem to talk about a lot where they're like, oh, they probably just ran off. They'll come back. It was a all hands on deck. We're looking for this girl. Something is up. So they came to find out that there were two sightings of her the night that she went missing, both in Halifax when she dropped off the items at her sister's, along with Millersburg Square, which is where her car was found. Now, we were talking about this a little bit before we dove into the case, but this is one of those ones where there are two different timelines that have been reported over the years. Initially, it was said that Tracey had stopped at her sister's at 6 o'clock. And then 10 to 15 minutes later, she ended up leaving. And then her sister actually showed back up home at 6:30. So literally a half hour after she had shown up there. And her and her husband had been out to dinner. They came home. They found the items on the porch. And Tracey was obviously gone at this point. But there have also been comments in the media more recently where it says Tracey didn't drop these items off to her sisters until 10 o'clock at night. So it's like, did she drive around with a grill for 4 hours in her car? Right. Tammy and her husband were home at that point. Why,
and why so many years later is there a difference?
Yeah, that was the thing that like, it gets a little, convoluted in reporting sometimes. So I like to tell both sides of it, but I tend to believe the first timeline of her showing up around 6.
It just makes more sense.
Exactly. So as authorities continued their investigation, it came to their attention that Tracey had actually left behind several things that you would expect her to have brought with her. First of all, she had this retainer that she wore. I guess she had a jaw condition. So her parents said that that's something she totally would have brought anywhere. And she also left behind like a lot of money. She had $300 in cash and she had $400 in her bank account. You would think that if someone's trying to leave their life behind, they would be taking $700, which is probably like a lot more money today back in 1989. So,
and for a teen that age, that's a ton of money.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have someone that was asking, is Millersburg Square a mall or like an actual little town?
So it's like
square.
I would call it like a small little shopping center, like kind of where, you can walk outside. There's like a little gazebo and there's little shops and restaurants and stuff in there. So I would say more of like maybe an outdoor mall kind of. Yeah.
This is also, I just wanted to jump in and say, this is definitely part of an era where police were generally a little too willing to say someone has run away.
Yes.
And I think, maybe as forensic science continues to develop, we're going to find out that reaches back into the 70s, 60s, and 50s. That many kids had been taken and been treated very badly or killed even. But it's just this sort of, they up and ran away, regardless of the evidence to the contrary. Because here is clearly a lot of evidence that, okay, you're going to run away, but you're not going to you have a car. Why would you take your car?
Why would you take the car?
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
Yep.
And that's something that we talk about a lot because we do cover a lot of cases from the 70s, 80s, 90s. And it seems like that whole 24-hour waiting period was like police's go-to.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, let's just wait and see if they come back, when those 24 hours could be some of the most important hours in the investigation to start tracking down where this person might be.
Definitely.
Sure.
So despite some possibly misconstrued statements regarding regular teenage troubles and that were reported in the early days after Tracey went missing, the general consensus among her family was that Tracey was not running away here. So within the first 3 months of the investigation, things honestly just came to a complete and total halt. There were no leads. Nobody could find Tracey. Nothing was coming in for authorities to work, and it was practically cold from the very beginning. However, over time, more details regarding the night that Tracey was last seen did come to light. So obviously we know she was at her sister's. We know she was in Millersburg Square. And then there was also another sighting reported of Tracey near the Susquehanna River sometime that same night. And that's only about a 3-minute drive from Millersburg Square. We don't know what she was doing there. We don't know what time she was seen there, but we know that there was a reported sighting of her in this location. Authorities also uncovered that Tracey had planned to meet with a friend in the square that night. So you can assume she probably dropped off the things at her sister's, went over to the square, and was just waiting for this person. And come to find out, it was her boyfriend that she was supposed to be meeting. Other than that, though, there really wasn't much else reported for quite some time. And then several years later in 91, again, after pretty much no movement in the case, it was reported that there was a lead that came in, and it had to do with 2 vans. So there were these people that owned and operated a business within Millersburg Square. They apparently weren't around the weekend that Tracey went missing, but they had heard these rumors perpetuated about these vans that were like lurking around the square, and it was sketchy, and they wanted to report it.
That's so also very 80s, like sketchy vans.
Yes. And I guess so. It was a mother-son duo who owned this shop there, and they actually noticed a van that was supposedly dark in color. This was the one that they were saying was seen around the area. And they were like, no, we're going to police now. And the son drew a picture of the van and everything. And they were like, this van is sketchy. I don't know what's going on with it. We've seen it in the area. I think it's something you need to look into. But that was literally it. Yet another lead in this case that went completely nowhere. No one ever saw the van again. What could that mean? Who knows? So now fast forward to November of 1993, and it's now over 4 years since Tracey went missing, and a farmer whose property abutted the Wiccanisco Creek in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, found some items that belonged to Tracey. And it's reported that what was left of Tracey's wallet, along with her driver's license and her National Honor Society card, were found washed up onto this guy's land. So you would assume, you knew she took her purse from her car. So these would have been items that would have been in her purse. Could they have potentially found that within this creek? All of that. And this location was only about a 10-minute drive from Millersburg Square, obviously where we know Tracey's car was.
So something that I was thinking at this point is, it's like, okay, you have this creek. Is there a larger body of water that flows into this creek? Exactly. How did these items get here? Was she actually here at this creek location, or a person that abducted her or murdered her specifically came here to put those items there?
Yeah, or tossed a purse in one place and it ends up on this guy's property.
Right. Exactly.
And what year was this washed up?
1993. So it was like towards the end of 93. So you're over 4 years now. Yeah. So how is this just being found now? And they didn't find anything else. They never found her purse or anything like that. Just those 2 cards and a portion of her wallet. So there were some tips and leads that came in after that, but yet again, nothing goes anywhere. And it seems as though around the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, there were a few comments from police saying like, things are heating up. We're starting to get more information. And they had mentioned that they believed that whoever did this, and at this point they are believing that Tracey was the victim of an abduction and murder, they were thinking that whoever did this was somebody that knew her. So, and I did want to bring up too, before we move on, because we mentioned the boyfriend and then I kind of glossed over the boyfriend, which you would think in any case that authorities are more than likely going to look at a significant other. Mm-hmm. And so there was like a lot of conjecture online about the boyfriend, and I guess supposedly his family owned a pool business, and there were rumors perpetuated about the idea that maybe Tracey's body was dumped in an area where a pool was being built, and then they covered her with concrete, and then, you know, obviously it would have been near impossible to find her remains at that point. But this was just speculation, kind of just, you know, going around online. A lot of the comments came from Facebook where I saw it, you know, where people were saying like, oh, I grew up here. And this was stuff that they were saying. But authorities did look into the boyfriend, from what I understand. They scrutinized him a lot in the beginning. And then for some reason or another, they felt as though, you know, he was able to be cleared. And as of today, it really does not seem like they were ever fully interested in the boyfriend as having involvement. So,
and was he a teen also, or was he an older boyfriend?
That I'm not sure. That was something I couldn't find. I don't even know his name. I couldn't find anything about him other than people just saying like, oh, the boyfriend lived here and oh, his family owned this business. And that was really it.
Yeah. You think of, you know, he's a kid, a teen also.
Yeah.
Maybe not as likely, but then, you know, it makes me think of the Kristen Smart case, and their, you know, his parents having all of their hands in it, probably helping to bury her in the family backyard and everything. So
exactly. Yeah.
You never know.
You really don't. So also, and I did just want to mention too, Tracey had made a phone call. I don't know how they were able to figure this out, but she called the boyfriend while she was in Millersburg Square. So I wonder if that's like another way they were able to confirm like she was definitely there. Someone didn't just put her car in the parking lot. She was actually in that location. Now, as we were talking about before, over the past couple years, that is where things have really started to heat up in Tracey's case. There was like a really long lull of barely any information until 2019, where there was a lot of stuff reported in the news, big stuff. So I wanted to start with what comes out in 2019, and then we're going to jump around a little bit and kind of backtrack so you can kind of see like where we're going with this. So in 2019, 2 people end up arrested and charged, but those charges were not for Tracey's murder. So I want to give some context. In 2018, a woman named Holly Mallett came forward to police to tell them about this friend or acquaintance of hers. I don't really know their relationship, but his name was Matthew Webster, and she had made some comments about him, about how he was allegedly somehow involved in Tracey's abduction, rape, and murder. And authorities had stated that Holly was considered a material witness in the case. And just for clarity's sake, we are going to keep backing up a little bit. So most of these comments started in 2016. Holly goes to police in 2018, and then all of this was reported in 2019. So according to an article with the Republican and Herald, authorities stated that sometime in 2016, a property located on Middle Road in Halifax, Pennsylvania was searched. And this house was said to be only a very short drive from where Tracey's sister Tammy had lived. Now, this property on Middle Road had been previously owned by Matthew Webster, this guy that Holly Mallett told authorities had potentially been involved in whatever happened to Tracey. So then the story from there goes something like this. Matthew allegedly came to Holly's home the day after this search took place on his previously owned property, and he arrived there with some other random woman who's never been identified publicly. It's unclear who she was or what her relation to them was or anything like that. But Matthew was apparently inebriated at the time that he made these statements to Holly, but allegedly said something to her about how he was involved in the rape and murder of Tracey Kroh. And the Republican and Herald reported the following regarding those alleged statements. Quote, Mallett went on to tell authorities that he and his buddies came into contact with Kroh at the square in Millersburg. The woman recalled Webster telling her it was supposed to be a rape and done, but then it turned out to be a lot more than that, end quote. And apparently, as Matthew's divulging this information to Holly, the unidentified woman that he's with is allegedly telling him just, no, stop talking.
Too late for that.
Yeah,
honestly,
sorry.
right?
Yeah. So from there, 2 more years go by. So now we're in June of 2018. And that's when Holly came forward to police to tell them about this encounter she'd had with Webster and this mystery woman. So roughly another year goes by, and May 3rd, 2019, based on what Holly told police, and I believe because she was considered a material witness, a state superior court judge authorized authorities to wiretap Matthew Webster's phone and electronics. And then grand jury proceedings were set to take place a month from then on June 6th, 2019. And Holly was set to testify that day as she'd received a subpoena for testimony in regards to Tracey's case too. Now, 2 to 3 days prior to those proceedings on June 3rd and 4th, 2019, Holly and Matthew spoke on the phone. And of course, we know there's this wiretap going on, at least on Matthew's side. So these conversations are being recorded. And during these conversations, Matthew said he knew about the whole situation with Holly going to authorities, obviously because they're convening a grand jury. Like, of course he knows now.
Right.
But Holly told Matthew that she was, quote, mentally handicapped and not fit to testify, end quote. And she also supposedly mentioned something along the lines of police having coerced her into making those statements that she originally gave to them in 2018. And during this conversation, Matthew allegedly forgave Holly for going to police and offered to pay for a lawyer to represent her at the grand jury trial. He's like, it's okay.
bizarre.
You went to police. I'm going to pay for your lawyer.
Even though we don't know
Also,
their
why?
relationship.
I'm sorry. Also, why would she be going to the police in the first place?
Exactly.
Right.
Like,
And even though we don't know their relationship, it seems like there was some type of romantic relationship here.
Yes.
And now it's like, you know, a lover's tryst may have sent her to police.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then now she's regretting it.
tracking.
And he's kind of talking to her, maybe getting her to change her story or something like that. It just seems weird. We don't
And
know
how-
the relationship, but
How odd for her to just be like, I just want you to know I'm mentally handicapped. Like, you've known me for
Yeah.
years, but I just
Yeah.
want to let you know. And
It was just the
unless
strangest thing.
it's very, very bizarre. And like, how slow are the freaking wheels of justice in this part? Like,
Mhm.
2016, we're talking all these years later, and they're just starting to sort of get around to court proceedings.
Yep.
on.
Exactly. So also during these same recorded phone calls, apparently Matthew and Holly discussed what they were going to say to police to like get their story straight, essentially. And they were like, okay, these are the accounts that we're going to give to, I don't know, maybe the grand jury or whoever they were going to talk to. And obviously now, you know, a couple days later, the grand jury proceedings roll around and both Holly and Matthew flat out lied. And they said they did not discuss what Holly was supposed to say. They didn't discuss what Matthew was supposed to say, all of this. And obviously, because of that, they were both charged with perjury because they knew that they were lying because they had these recorded conversations. So Matthew Webster ended up in prison for about 4 to 6 months. He received time or credit for time served. And then Holly had been given, what was it? She was given 6 to 23 months in prison for her perjury charged. But she was released from prison in February of 2021.
Okay. And so Matt was originally, though, arrested with this other woman. Yeah.
I don't know
am
if the
getting
other
that
woman
right?
was arrested. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. Because when they had him, just kind of, what charges were they originally holding him on when these phone calls were going back and forth with Holly? Do we know?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure on that.
Okay. Because I know it wasn't for murder.
Perjury,
for
obviously, at
Tracey,
that point,
but,
yeah.
like, prior,
Maybe
if he's being
the crime,
held.
maybe.
Yeah, it could have been
Maybe something totally different.
Yeah.
Okay.
And before we move forward, I did just want to, unfortunately, we have to back up one more time before we get into like all of the other stuff. So in June of 2019, at that exact same time, when they are going through these grand jury proceedings, police are searching another property that's supposedly connected to Tracey's case. And this house was located on Mountain House Road in Jackson Township, Pennsylvania. And this property was roughly a 15-minute drive from Millersburg Square. But mind you, it has absolutely no connection, from what I understand anyway, to either Holly or Matthew.
Okay.
So we were like, when I was researching this, when I'm telling him this story, I'm like, what is going on? Who is this other person? So this property that they were now searching belonged to a man named Mark Warfel. And back when Tracey went missing, he was 56 years old and ran an auto body shop that was located on this property on Mountain House Road. And reporters had even interviewed at the time this now 86-year-old man in July of 2019 when his property is being searched. And, obviously they're asking him, are you concerned? Are you worried? And he's like, no, I'm not concerned about anything. They're not going to find anything here.
Mhm.
So at this point, no one knows like what this Warfel guy's potential involvement could have been in Tracey's abduction and murder, why his property is being searched in the first place. So it seemed like everything about Warfel just kind of came out of the blue. Obviously, you saw this other stuff being reported. You're like, okay, what's up with Holly? What's up with Matthew? Did he actually say, that he was involved? What do we do here? So after this, Mark Warfel actually got himself into a bunch of trouble with police, and Penn Live reported that Warfel was, quote, arrested on September 4th, 2019, after he was accused of repeatedly harassing, threatening, and breaking into the home of a woman in Halifax Township, end quote.
As an 86-year-old man.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Mark is still spunky.
Right? Supposedly there was some other situation, like some other criminal thing going on that this woman might have known about. And, I guess he was not thrilled that she might say something, from what I understand.
Okay.
So now, after that, it's a little bit quiet in the media until 2022. And in March of 2022, there's actually a second search conducted on Mark Warfel's house again. And 3 months after that, in May of this year, Mark Warfel was finally named as a suspect in Tracey Kroh's abduction and presumed murder.
Wow.
So obviously, using the word suspect is a big deal, I feel like, in any case, because you don't want to drag people's names through the mud or anything like that. Police want to make sure they have their stuff together before they, move forward with this.
Yeah, they must really have something or found something that's strong enough to name him as a suspect. Okay.
Absolutely. So then there's another thing that happens with Warfel and Tracey's younger sister. Now, this was Kimberly, who's younger. Tammy was older. She apparently wore a wire and went to the prison where Warfel was being held on his now burglary charges from 2019 to confront him about her sister's case. And WGAL reported what took place during that meeting, stating, quote, her sister asked him to admit to being her biological father and asked him questions about Kroh's disappearance, end quote.
When I heard this, I was like, where did that even come from?
It's like such a soap opera twist part where you're like, this is already.
I have so many questions too, because when I had to rewind when I was listening to your episode, and then that sent me on a research, because what I can't find is who set up the wire for them to take into an incarceration setting. I mean, that's a whole different level. You get searched. So did they make a deal with the prison? And who made the deal? Was this just a family thing? Was there law enforcement involved? Like, where did this come from?
Exactly. And the wild thing, too, is in a more recent article, it's been stated that it's confirmed that he is her biological father.
Oh, really?
So I don't know.
Launched,
Yeah. I think it was in August or September when that was reported.
Wow.
And she's the younger sister of Tracey.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. All right.
And there are even more damning comments in this whole discussion with him as well. And apparently he said that he had no involvement in Tracey's murder, but stated that somebody else killed Tracey and threw her body down a mine shaft. But nothing else about that particular comment.
Is that Big Goofus?
Is that what?
He refers to somebody as Big Goofus.
Yeah.
Did he make up this person named Big Goofus?
The most bizarre thing. I don't understand.
So was there a mine shaft on his property? Like,
That's what I'd like to know. Yeah, there's so many questions. So, and on top of it all, apparently he's also being looked into for the death of his wife. And
of course,
I don't know
why
exactly.
not?
Yeah, just keep
at this point.
Yeah. So, and not only that, other potential sexual assault cases as well, which also kind of made me think about the fact that he is supposedly the biological father of Tracey's younger sister. So was that a sexual assault situation? And then, maybe Tracey and Kimberly's mother was pregnant from that.
Well, I mean, we always look at past behavior when we're looking at future behavior and predicting behavior. And if he has a history of sex crimes, he's broken into a woman's house in his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
To say that he had maybe just seen Tracey and was going to sexually assault her back in his mid 50s, not a far reach, really.
It really does seem to track. I mean, for somebody that is has this level of criminality, but is able to remain contained until some other sort of factor is now layered in. And that other factor is, you guys cover the possibility, because we're not medical doctors here, and this is all conjecture, which you set up earlier. I'm going to reiterate that. But, you know, there are changes in one of the first things that is noticeable in many forms of dementia is an inability to contain behaviors and increasing erratic behaviors, increasing like maybe they're better in the morning, but they're more erratic in the afternoon. Their behaviors start getting even more disorganized, as we would say. So yeah, all of this tracks, you know, not that there's a ton of proof, but it tracks with something going on for him cognitively.
Definitely. And he was evaluated by a psychologist, and it was just determined that he wasn't competent to go to trial in his burglary case. And obviously at this point, now that we know he's considered a suspect in Tracey's case, due to the fact that they believe he has dementia, then how could he be able to stand trial in Tracey's case? And I think that's the most difficult thing, is like, he was removed from prison and put into a medical facility for obviously prisoners, but you know, he just was not able to cognitively stay there. So overall, it's the big question here is how do you ever find justice in this case with someone who can't exactly tell you exactly what happened?
Right. Well, and obviously there had to be some inkling of this going on for them to even order a competency eval, right? So, you know, something wasn't making sense to his attorneys, or his family, you know, advocated for it. And then sure enough, you know, the psychologist says he has a condition and it's not going to get better. So this isn't like, oh, someone's schizophrenic, let's get them on meds, let's get them regulated, and then they can stand trial. This is the part that I was listening to of your show that first time, and I was just like, oh, this is so horrific, because after all these decades to finally get a suspect. And then it's like, you can't try him for it at this point.
Well, it also goes to, you know, sort of this, I've seen this as a trope in science fiction movies or science fiction TV shows or Black Mirror episodes where, you know, if a person is severely cognitively impaired at a state that is chronologically different from where they were when they committed the crimes, are they even the same person? And how do you hold someone accountable for something that they have no awareness of? And I mean, our legal system now is pretty clear. If you're guilty, you're guilty. Even if we see people like, you know, whether or not they're actual issues, we see like Harvey Weinstein gets wheeled in, and he's presenting as lower functioning, and his defense is coming with all this sort of defense of, you know, this isn't the person who committed those crimes. He's weak, he's broken, he can't stand this. But I think in this case, you guys were able to set up a history of these events that show that he's really declining.
Definitely.
So Scott, working in a prison and I guess it would go same with folks who end up developing dementia and now they're in prison. They might not even know why they're in prison, right? Like, it happens. So what is the likelihood that they do sort of a mercy release with those people, or do they just transfer them to a medical facility?
Interesting question. That actually depends on the state. There are some states that look at it as, we'll do a compassionate release when we know, I mean, dementia is a progressive disease, and it's not always necessarily complete altruism on the part of the prison in releasing somebody. Prisons in states that don't have a lot of funding and don't really, excuse my French, don't really give a shit about their inmates, will say, well, we don't want to pay for it. Let's put them out on the street, and we'll let public funding. At least it won't be on our income stream to take care of this person who has terminal cancer or is, you know, within 6 months of dying from dementia. But many states will have particular wards that are geriatric wards, especially if they have a lot of lifers, or they'll have wards for people that are ill. But it's not like the greatest level of care. Definitely
Sure.
not not what any of us would want. But then again, it comes back to this issue of, you know, it is one of those things that will happen when you work in prison, is you work with these people and you're reading their criminal file and you've seen the terrible things that they've done, but they're also like a weak, helpless person now. And I mean, sometimes you have compassion for it, sometimes you don't. I mean, I used to have these conversations with the nurses. Like, we'd go, wow, it's really sad that, you know, inmate so-and-so is declining so badly. And there's like, oh, well, look what he did to his kids. You know, it's a very interesting space to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, so he's 89 now, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And have there been any updates since June of this year, where you left us with a cliffhanger in your episode?
I know. There haven't been a lot of updates. I know I had seen that article where they mentioned that it was confirmed that Kim was his biological daughter.
Okay.
So I did see that. And, you know, a lot of it just really kind of people rehashing the case, discussing it more, and just it's really unfortunate. Like, there's just not really any other updates on, like, did you find anything on the property or anything like that? And something that actually we didn't mention, but that I thought was particularly intriguing from our episode was when they initially searched his property, they had found a shed that had been burned on the inside. And so I wonder what came of that. What were you able to find in there? Do you feel as though maybe evidence had been destroyed in there?
Sure.
And, you know, there haven't been any updates about if they found her remains, any indications of anything they would have found in any of these searches, nothing else about Holly or Matthew. So, you know, I think it's just a waiting game at this point, but it seemed as though they had wanted to, I think, redo the evaluation, but I haven't seen anything about that.
I mean, they can order an evaluation every few months if they want, but it, like Scott said, it's progressive. It's not going to get better. So what's the point? Exactly. But I think, you know, he probably, excuse me, doesn't have that much longer to live. And I don't know what his like sentence is for the burglary charge. Like, will he eventually be released? But then do they have enough that they're going to charge him? And they probably won't, because you're not going to be able to prosecute this guy. So you're not going to waste the money to do it. I don't know what resolve or justice kind of looks like for Tracey's family in this.
That's something that we talk about a lot with like these older cases where it's been like decades. Sometimes like we covered Simone Reidinger's case, and her family is very adamant. It's like, this is a recovery case. They never found her sister's, they never found her body or anything. They just want to know what happened to her, where she is, and lay her to rest. And I mean, for all we know, Tracey's family could feel the same way. They just want to know what happened.
Yeah.
And they can find her. And I guess my question to you is like Scott, how you were saying earlier, where, you know, maybe somebody with dementia, they're better during the day and worse at night. Are there ever moments of lucidity with somebody that has dementia where you can say, hey, what happened? You need to tell me. We're not looking to prosecute you, but we need to know what the deal is, because the family deserves to know.
Yeah.
That's a great question. And that's exactly where my head would go to, is I'm wondering if, I would hope that the prosecution and defense are working together on this in a way, and that they're all trying to find, and that does happen even in big cases like this, where the common goal is just to, you know, get the most appropriate outcome that would be possible. So I'm wondering if I was a defense attorney, I would probably use the strategy of, let's get him incompetent to stand trial, and be very careful about saying whether or not he's sundown. Sundowning is the term that's used when you're lower functioning in the latter half of the day as compared to the early part of the day. You know, what would make sense is to try and get him during those moments of lucidity early in the day, and try and get anything from those interviews that would indicate, I mean, clearly I really think that there was some leakage when he started talking about, oh, well, if you were going to do it, I mean, they'd hide the body up there in the mine. And she was a little thing. I mean, like those statements he made of how small she was, it would have been really easy to overpower her, probably choked her. Those are very telling. I mean, and like, this is where I would go to Dr. Amy and Dr. Megan about, you know, who were experts in criminality and criminogenic thinking, that kind of leakage usually indicates that that's an area that should be explored.
Yeah.
So I feel like time is of the essence. Like if they got him stabilized and we're trying get him up early in the day, get him hydrated, get some caffeine into him, and maybe you can get something that you can explore. But geez, if there are any mine shafts, have they, if there is mining in that part of the country, have they gone and explored any of that?
Well, it seems like the police are keeping so much of the investigation under wraps. And on one hand, I feel like, maybe when Warfel passes away, if they can put together a story that is as close as to what they think happened to be able to provide her family that,
right.
Maybe that's something. But like, what's the connection with Webster? And,
how did he
that's
know?
what I wanted.
How did he know? And are there other people they're still looking at that they could prosecute for, even if it's just accessory or conspiracy or something like that? I don't know.
And the other thing too, how we had talked before, how they said they were sure this was somebody that she knew.
Right.
And her family was sure of that as well. Like, she's not going to go with a stranger. Come to find out, she knew Warfel, and her dad had frequented his auto body shop.
Yeah.
So you've got that connection there, but I haven't seen anything about Holly or Matthew and how they might have known Tracey. So did they have involvement in that way?
One of our listeners in our chat, Ashley, she says, why would he kill his biological daughter's half sister? Maybe she tried to confront him. And isn't it weird that, like, okay, Tracey and her dad frequented his shop, and then he had at least one sexual relationship with
his
Tracey's mom. Right.
Yeah.
We were talking about this before, where it was like, were little things said when they were younger? And, maybe this came out after they had, frequented the auto body shop or whatever. And maybe the dad stopped going there or something like that. And they've like put these things together over time to say, oh, maybe this is how he could have been involved. Maybe this is why she was like, wait a second, I need to ask him if he's my biological father. Like, maybe they were just like things that trickled out over the years that they put together themselves.
Right. Gosh, it is such a crazy case with this.
It really is.
It's fascinating.
The condition he's in. Yeah, it really is. Do you guys, missing persons cases, all of these cases can leave us feeling icky, but there's such this open-endedness to a lot of these. Do you guys ever feel the pull of doing something like being involved in searches or taking it a step beyond the podcast?
Yeah, I think we would really love to do something like that.
We've talked about it. We've talked about going a little more hands-on with certain things. Not saying it's out of the realm of possibility.
Sure.
Yes, we are interested. Yes. And we've talked to people before, like, what is the goal of the podcast? From the podcast perspective, it's to get these stories that are not told out to the masses, and hopefully they get to the right ears or get people talking. And I know it's like, some people hate speculation. And we talk about this in several of the cases where there's, totally outlandish speculation where you're just coming up with a theory out of nothing. And there's speculation that we try to stick to with the podcast and the episodes that we do, where we're taking the evidence that's put forward. We're taking, common tropes from different things that we've seen before, other cases that have been solved in that way, or similar cases that have been solved, and using those to kind of come together to figure something out. Or to ask a question that hadn't been asked yet.
Yeah.
And I think that with the podcast, getting the stories out is great, but we would definitely be open to, expanding further out the podcast in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I imagine that just feels like a pull for, these types of cases that you just wish you could do more. But I think doing the show is a lot. And you're right. It's conversation, but the way your show comes across is that it is intelligent curiosity and question asking. It's not as if you're wrapping it all up and trying to, solve it with conjecture. You're just, what's
asking
going
questions.
on here? Yeah.
Just asking questions.
Just asking.
Just asking questions. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing Tracey's story with us. I hope it does reach a few more ears here. And I hope everybody tunes into your show now. I know Shannon said, yay, something else to binge. So you got 60 episodes to binge.
Right.
That's ready. Where can folks find you guys for your podcast and or social media?
Yep. So we are on all major podcast platforms. So you would just search Wicked Deeds. It should come right up. And then for social media on Instagram, we are Wicked Deeds Pod. And then we are just Wicked Deeds on Twitter. And we also have a Facebook page as well, which is, again, same thing, Wicked Deeds Podcast. Pretty much the same all across the board.
Just Google Wicked Deeds. I don't know why I even asked that anymore. Well, it was so good to see you guys again. Thank you.
Great to see you guys again.
Come to England with us. Come to CrimeCon UK.
Hey,
Across the pond, eh?
it would be. I've never been abroad. I've never left the country. So.
Oh, there you go.
Perfect time.
Good choice for it. But I think we will probably be in Austin next year at the True Crime Podcast Festival.
Cool.
So hopefully we'll see you guys.
Meet up in person.
Yes, definitely.
Yes. But thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us and getting this out there.
It was wonderful.
Of course. And keep in touch. And to everyone else, thanks for tuning in tonight, spending some time with us. And we'll see you next time on our next live Behind the Couch. Good night, guys.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks.